otoy. El año pasado sembré 270 matas y este año ese mismo semilla lo he sembrado 400 matas y gracias al programa que nos ha ayudado, nos ha orientado y hemos mejorado el siembro del cultivo.
Nosotros hemos tenido buenos resultados en metodología como enseñanza de distanciamiento de siembra en diferentes cultivos, por ejemplo, tomate, pimentón, plátano, otoe, ñampí, ñame, y enseñarles diferentes tipos de manejo de plagas, enfermedades, preparación de abono.
El rubro que me correspondió el año pasado es otoy. El año pasado sembré 270 matas y este año ese mismo semilla lo he sembrado 400 matas y gracias al programa que nos ha ayudado, nos ha orientado y hemos mejorado el siembro del cultivo.
Nosotros hemos tenido buenos resultados en metodología como enseñanza de distanciamiento de siembra en diferentes cultivos, por ejemplo, tomate, pimentón, plátano, otoe, ñampí, ñame, y enseñarles diferentes tipos de manejo de plagas, enfermedades, preparación de abono.
Buenas tardes, es un gusto darles la bienvenida al webinar Cambio Climático y Gestión del Riesgo.
Through the YouTube streaming of FAO and fao.org/Americas. For everyone who's here with us, this is part of a series organized by the FAO about risk management and resilience in agriculture. We have already had 2 different events, one of them to anticipate
De la alerta a la
and respond to disasters, and the other one on the early alert for actions in reducing risk and mitigating impact of disasters. You will be able to have access to those complementary documents as well as a video for each sessions in the following chat. Before starting, I would like to give the following preamble. There is a growing awareness of how climate change and climate variability have increased the disasters pace and have also driven impact in the agricultural sector and the agri-food system. For example, it is very visible in agriculture how these disasters are driven by the unsustainable use of land and wrong practices or bad practices in the general use of biodiversity that are also part of the impact in our general systems. We need to acknowledge how this is having an impact of improving poverty, among other things, which are key pillars for our development for Latin America and the Caribbean. The above mentioned is even more critical with socio-economic impact of COVID-19 and the consequences that now we have to add to the increase of food prices because of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. This is today. Tomorrow, we'll have other events, maybe at a global or at a regional level, that will be part of the sustainable challenges ahead of us, and I will also add lack of stability. These are different layers of vulnerability that are connected among each other. And that is why today, during this webinar, we would like to talk about how 2 communities of practices, COPs, have collaborated so far to integrate different systems, tools, visions, and integrated programs, and facing jointly some of these challenges. I am talking about the COP for climate change and the COP of risk management. Each one of them has an onset that has defined for decades the way in which we understand and manage these issues. The climate change COP is basically structured on the foundations of our environmental agenda and also the conventions part of the Summit of Earth in 1992. The COP for risk management, on the other hand, is also rooted in the humanitarian action, but at the same time with the change of paradigms to work before, to try to work upon before everything happens in a preventive point of view and to be prepared for them. Today, we are going to see how these 2 different currents are working, what are the challenges ahead of us, and how we can also leverage them. That's why we have a panel that has members of the first level. We have, first of all, Mr. Paulina Aldunce, who's a researcher of the Science Center for Climate and Resilience of the Agronomic Science School at the University of Chile, who's also the co-author of the summary for the last report for the IPCC, where she participates for many years already. I would also like to welcome Mrs. Jessica LaGuardia, who's the head of unit in the Climate Change Department of Environment and Natural Resources in El Salvador, and who has wide experience in public policies, finance, and economy, among other things. And Mr. Almario Casimir, who's a specialist in soil sciences in the office of the Ministry of Agriculture. Preparedness. Thank you very much, all of you, for being present in this event. I would like to now share with you what is going to be the logistics. We're going to have each panel member with a presentation between 7 to 10 minutes talking about their own perspective on this convergence on climate change and risk management. And then we will have a panel and I will be asking questions to that panel, moderating it. So I would like to ask you to please leave your questions here in the chat, and also making comments on our social networks using the hashtags Conferencia Online FAO and hashtag Cambio Resiliencia. I would also like to tell you that there's a certificate of attendance after this seminar, and the ones who would like to do so, to receive one, then you will have to let the people in charge know beforehand so that they can issue it. We will have first a framework type of presentation by Mrs. Paulina Aldunce. She will talk about this convergence between climate action and risk management of disasters. I will let you know when your time is up. Paulina, go ahead. Thank you very much, and good afternoon here in Chile. First of all, thank you, Marion and FAO, for this invitation. We have made a great deal of progress in the integration of these two areas that you mentioned, but we still have a lot of room to grow. There are many gaps that we need to close, and we have to look at them as opportunities to be able to integrate them in a better manner, and also try to reduce vulnerability and increase the resilience of the ones who are suffering the most because of these disasters. I have a presentation that I would like to share with you. Please let me know if you can see that. Is this okay? I'm sorry, but it's not in the presentation mode. I'm sorry, my computer is a little bit slow this morning.
Ahí, listo. Ahora sí.
Igual lo vemos con el marco.
It's fine, but we cannot see it yet as in the framework. Now we're reading your emails. I'm sorry, everything was fine when we did the test. Let me go back to the presentation. 1 second. Don't worry, take your time.
Ahí. Ay, Dios mío. Ahí, ahora sí.
Ahora sí, adelante.
Okay, go ahead. Let me try to make up for the time I have just missed. Okay, let me introduce the subject matter related to the scientific evidence. I tried to work on the last findings of the report of the IPCC that all of you might know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, right? So specifically in group number 2, which is the adaptation, impacts, and vulnerability group, which is the one we are dealing with, or that is closer to our subject matter, has one key message that I would like to share with you. This was released a couple of months ago, which is that the scientific evidence there's no room for mistakes or errors in scientific evidence, which means that climate change is one threat for human being and the planet's health. Any additional delay in this global action might be translated into losing that window of opportunities that is happily closing to make sure a habitable future. What we're saying is also that this report offers some solutions, and among those, there are some of them related to the adaptation. I'm not going to elaborate more on this because we are going to be breaking it down during my presentation, but I would just like to leave the idea that scientific evidence for all the reasons we have already mentioned are certainly there's no room for mistakes there, and then also that we are moving forward. I would like to be very clear and give you a context on how we work on those. For example, in the first report I am right now mentioning, which is once again on the number 2, is certainly based on more than 30,000 articles. In other words, what I'm saying here is not from the point of view of just a scientific team of people, but we're talking about, so that context is already very important. Another interesting message is that recent changes in climate are generalized, quick, and more intense, and that there are no precedents in thousands of years. In other words, we are right now undergoing climate changes that are more frequent. More centuries, temperature has increased. This is the peak from the beginning of the industrial area, and you can see the peak in temperature that certainly matches that onset. So we wouldn't like to hear, of course, again, that climate change does not exist, because we have proof of that, scientific proof. And you can see that here, but zoomed in closer periods of time. So 1.1 Celsius degrees has increased. Another interesting message is that it's unmistakable that human activities are having an impact and even causing climate change, considering that this is making that climate events that are extreme, such as heat strikes or heat waves or rainstorms and others, or drought, of course, are more frequent and severe. That means that we are having, and we are going to have in the future, more and more of these events. But what's even worse, every time that this happens, they are going to be even more severe than what we have seen so far. So what are we talking about? We already mentioned heavy rain, droughts, and fires. And when I said fire climate or fire combinations of conditions, is because there are more fires because of climate change, because of this combination 30-30-30 that you might have heard about, and that is very interesting in climate change environment. More than 30 Celsius degrees and more 30 in wind velocity or wind speed, and also the warm conditions. That means that they are more frequent in this area.
Aunque tengamos emisiones netas cero partiendo de mañana, vamos a llegar de todas maneras al 1,5 grados Celsius. Pero la idea es que aunque lleguemos y
Me parece que estamos con un problema de audio con nuestra panelista. Demos unos segundos a ver si se estabiliza la conexión. ¿Y ustedes me pueden confirmar si a mí me escuchan bien?
Sí, te escuchamos, Mario.
Me parece que perdimos a Paulina. Vamos a dar unos segundos a ver si ella puede reconectar. Si no, vamos a pasar con la siguiente presentación. Pero, por favor, les pedimos un poquito de paciencia para ver si podemos recuperar a Paulina en la conexión. Les comento a los que se están sumando a la conexión de que estamos en el webinar Cambio Climático y Gestión del Riesgo, una agenda común, parte de una serie sobre gestión del riesgo y resiliencia en la agricultura organizada por FAO. Estamos transmitiendo a través de nuestro canal de YouTube y también a través del sitio web fao.org/Américas, y estábamos en la presentación de la doctora Paulina Aldunce, sobre el gran contexto del cambio climático y también algunos elementos para poder entender el tema de este seminario, que es la convergencia entre la gestión del riesgo de desastres y la acción climática. Y ahora estamos, justo veo que Paulina se logra conectar nuevamente. Paulina, ¿estás con el teléfono en silencio? No hay ningún problema, estamos esperando que puedas reconectarte.
Ya, ahí me volví a conectar, ¿me ven?
Sí, te vemos. Faltaría que pudieras proyectar tu presentación.
Sí, un corte de luz, así que me conecté por el teléfono mejor, para estar más segura. Pucha, qué lástima. ¿Dónde quedaron? Quedaron en
Estábamos comentando las emisiones.
Ya, perfecto. Entonces, la idea es que lamentablemente en los próximos 20 años vamos a llegar a los 2,5 grados. Estoy esperando que se muestre la pantalla completa. Perdón, dije a los 2,5, al 1,5 grados. Y, chuta, no lo puedo creer. No sé qué está pasando. Se cortó la luz y cayó todo. Ay, qué lástima, Marion, lo siento.
No importa, yo creo que todos acá, después de 2 años de pandemia, estamos muy acostumbrados a los problemas de red y a tener que navegar estas circunstancias durante los seminarios en línea. Veamos si puedes recuperar la proyección a la presentación y si no, tal vez desde el equipo de IT se la puedan proyectar.
Sí, yo la mandé ayer, eso sería una buena idea, porque está absolutamente estancado mi computador con el corte de luz. Me tira unas diapos súper extrañas. A ver, no, yo creo que es mejor que lo proyecten ustedes, porque ni siquiera me está mostrando.
Tal vez vamos a hacer una cosa, mientras solucionamos el tema de tu proyección y le damos tiempo a que te pueda proyectar, yo invitaría a, si te parece, Paulina,
sí,
vamos a dar la introducción a Jessica La Guardia, del Ministerio de Ambiente y Recursos Naturales de El Salvador, que nos va a comentar de una iniciativa. Vamos a perder algunos elementos como contextuales de la convergencia entre cambio climático y la gestión del riesgo. Pero...
Ok, muchas gracias. Bueno, ya estoy proyectando la presentación, espero que se vea bien, ¿verdad? Para conversar un poco acerca del cambio climático y la gestión de riesgos, específicamente del proyecto Reclima en El Salvador, ¿verdad? Tal vez solo como para brindar un poco de contexto, ¿verdad? Acerca del país, ¿verdad? Dónde estamos ubicados, la vulnerabilidad del país y acerca de los riesgos que El Salvador atraviesa. Comentarles que el país está ubicado en la región centroamericana, que ha sido tipificada como una de las regiones más sensibles al cambio climático, ¿verdad? El Salvador ha estado experimentando muchos de estos fenómenos que también Paulina nos estuvo mencionando en la presentación de ella, ¿verdad? Con fenómenos más frecuentes, más intensos en cuanto a desastres climáticos, ¿verdad? Con altas repercusiones en los diferentes sectores de nuestra economía, incluyendo la parte agrícola. En El Salvador estos impactos o estos fenómenos causan reducción en los caudales promedios de ríos, niveles de agua subterránea, es decir, afecta la disponibilidad hídrica, pero también tenemos todo el otro extremo, ¿verdad? Cuando vienen estos eventos extremos de altas lluvias, de altas precipitaciones, generan desbordamientos e inundaciones. Los incrementos en temperatura también nos fomentan temas de incendios forestales, migración de especies, de biodiversidad. También tenemos migraciones de la población climáticamente forzadas, ¿verdad? En búsqueda de nuevos suelos, nuevas tierras que sean más fértiles. También tenemos una baja progresiva en la producción agrícola, tenemos daños y pérdidas de infraestructura, también incidencias en la salud por tema de vectores, y también todo esto genera gasto público, ¿verdad? Eso fue a nivel climático. Cuando lo vemos a nivel de amenazas o riesgos, los que más afectan a El Salvador son aquellos hidrometeorológicos, ¿verdad? Donde tenemos afectaciones por la variabilidad climática y cambio climático, ¿verdad? Que todos estos repercuten en huracanes, inundaciones, inclusive en algunas áreas específicas del país con granizadas. También tenemos sequías en ciertas áreas del país, lluvias torrenciales y deslizamientos, ¿verdad? Que son parte de los impactos que tenemos como El Salvador por parte del riesgo climático. Y luego, cuando vemos los recursos naturales que amenazan, las amenazas que tenemos a nivel de país, pues tenemos también que 10% del territorio tiene moderada susceptibilidad a inundaciones, 8% alta susceptibilidad y 7% muy alta. Pero también tenemos que 26% del territorio tiene moderada susceptibilidad a deslizamientos, 38% alta y 1% alta. Es decir, también nosotros tenemos mucha propensión al riesgo, ¿verdad? cuando, aquí está, cuando vemos también el tema de exposiciones o evaluar la exposición al riesgo frente a amenazas naturales, también tenemos una población expuesta a amenazas de inundaciones. Si vemos el mapa de El Salvador, vemos que la parte sur, ¿verdad? También tiene una población en riesgo a estas inundaciones.
And we have risks to floods. We see also that we have this risk of weather-related risks. And we see in the western part of the country that the probability of drought, that is to say, over 16 days without rains. And when we go to the west, we see that the drought is mild and moderated in this area. How does critical areas for social and environmental vulnerability in El Salvador, we see that the eastern area of the country is highly vulnerable. Within this context, where El Salvador is highly vulnerable to those risks, particularly the climatic ones and drought, we have here the dry Central America corridor. This is a very important part of El Salvador. We have the communities that are severely affected by the climate change. There is a shortage of water, and we have a poor management of the human resources, and there are unsustainable practices of the resources for forestry, but also related to the water management for the development of agriculture, livestock, and so on, and the use of water by humans. All of these will give rise to what we call the Reclima project. It means that we have to increase the resilient measures in this corridor. And this project seeks to improve the resilience of the livelihood of the population, that is to say, the people who live in this area of the dry corridor in the eastern part of the country, as we saw in the map, that is quite susceptible to the changes in climate. So this project is incorporating now the actions by at least four major institutions that are state-run. We have the Ministry of the Environment and the um, Natural Resources, the FIARE, and this is fund for the development of community projects, and we have 35 million as funding for these projects, and also the fund that has been implemented by FAO, and this is developed in 114 parishes. Now, when we see the components of these projects, we can say that there are three of them, and they are components that are interrelated, and they are seeking to increase the resilience of communities or by communities and the agri-systems while reducing also the vulnerability and therefore reducing the inherent risk that is embedded in these systems, also benefiting 5,000 families that are adapted to the climate and promoting the recovery of the soil, the seepaging of water, and through this component to improve resilience, we seek also to give accompany the specialized agents from the different institutions, and we have some community agents to provide training in these practices for environmental adaptation by reducing the risk at the same time. As far as the component number two is concerned, we seek to increase the resilience and to see the ecosystem and the environment implies reinforcing the governance systems and of information to over 20 community structures participating in the territories and improving the information gathering in order to inform the processes that are generated in the territories. These three factors are interrelated. They are the main pillars of this project in order to improve the resilience and the likelihood of these inhabitants living in this area and reducing their risks. When we see now the kind of practices that have been implemented and have been adopted through the countryside schools for farmers. We have the comprehensive management of the human resources in order to take care of those resources inside the communities and territories, and to have agri systems that are sustainable and healthy. And this would allow to implement practices contributing to revert and curb the degradation and improving the environmental conditions to favor the carbon sequestration by the mitigation of the climate change.
And also try to improve the water flows and soils. These are the 8 practices that we are currently teaching, that we are fostering through these systems, the agroforestry systems, the scattered landscaping that also allows for sequestration of CO2, these different systems, such as, for example, having resilient feed banks or forests for the non-seasonal during drafts. Also the tillage for conservation or maintenance or preservation for the soil coverage, terraces, seepage, flows of water. And we are understanding that also having all these initiatives or these scenarios will help us to know how we can work into different areas or different levels, such as, for example, as I mentioned before, the contour farming, among others. There's some irrigation or SCALL, and others that are also related to those systems, to the rainwater capture systems. We can see here some progress we've made so far in Reclima, and we have been training the community promoters, as we call them, in specific schools, field schools for farmers, to try to transfer different practices. We have already trained 21,000 farmers, men and women. We have also worked in different systematized lot plans. For example, we have prioritized 7,800 hectares for research and other type of production works we've done on our areas, such as the inclusion of seedlings, among others. 430 systems for drop irrigation, that is equivalent to 16 hectares for the production of vegetables, 320 systems for water collection, house water collection, also through the risk management process. And we have trained other technical staff from CENTA and other organizations, because the idea is to strengthen their capabilities. So this is just in general terms what we have been doing so far in El Salvador with Reclima. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica, for that presentation for Reclima, the Reclima project. That is quite interesting because it's built from a climate narrative. That means that it's funded by El Salvador Ministry and also from other organizations, but it's quite related to what we are doing right now, because we're talking about convergence, and that's exactly what we need from the disasters relief and others in this component that we have on the resources and the strengthening of capabilities, as was mentioned, and the life resilience, which are very important subject matters, as we were mentioning at the very beginning of this seminar. Okay, it looks like we have now we have already solved the issues we had with Paulina. So Paulina Aldunce, we are going to do everything from FAO. So if it's okay, let's look at your presentation once again, and not restart, but let's resume what we have been doing so far. It was interrupted by a technical issue, but we are ready to continue. Thank you. Go ahead, Paulina. Would you please go to slide number 6, so that I can go ahead and explain the graph, please. So let's go number 6, please. 1 second, please. We will be right here. We are not. Okay, okay, now. Perfect, but please, maybe 2 more. 1 more now. That's it. Oh no, another one. Okay, so we were talking about, just show for a minute that there are 4 or 5 different scenarios that the IPCC is proposing. And the best possible scenario is to have generalized or very high CO2 emissions reductions. And that means that today we might get to 4.5 degrees in 20 years. That's what we have right now. That's reality, in other words. That is a scenario that we are currently facing. And that also means that it's going to be translated into many other scenarios or events. But of course, what we are looking for is to try to bring this down both to the very low scenario, which is 1.5, as soon as possible. What we can see here is the projections or the forecast for different scenarios. And unfortunately, everything is in English because we have not translated this yet, not from the IPCC. We do not have this from the source. But anyway, let's continue. As you can clearly see here, right here to our left, when it says 1.5, or where we have the first bar, where it says the bar of number 1, we have already improved our risk level in extreme weather events that is related, for example, to rainfall. But if the water is still goes up or continues to goes up, the risk is also increased. So we level the intermediate levels, but how we can see if we increase it 2 degrees or more than 2 degrees, we are in the high level of risk already, only by those 2 degrees. And in the bottom part of the screen, we can see how this adaptation is working. We can see how the risk can be decreased if we have adaptation, if we do something about it through adaptation and through risk management. That means that since there is a limited adaptation or proactive adaptation, we can still decrease the risk. That's on the first 3 bars of our slide in the bottom part. That's where we are headed right now. That's where we are aimed at. That is the deep type of proactive adaptation to try to decrease disasters. Okay, the future risks at a global level related to climate, of course, is related to heat stress, water shortages, and if we're talking about 2 degrees, that means that we will have up to 20% of water availability for agriculture after 2050. That is to say, in things that are happening right now, there is going to be in detriment of food safety, of course, and the risk for floods. These are the future risks and how they would increase. Let me stop here for just a short while to try to compare adaptation and risk. If you look at these 2 definitions, they share many common points. For example, they both are accountable for the projected or real changes in terms of decrease. So what is happening today should at least be accountable for what is happening today in terms of threats, but at the same time to what might happen in the future. So in both scenarios, we are looking at the same perspective. Both scenarios are also fighting for decrease in vulnerability. In the case of adaptation to climate change, to try to moderate changes and try to leverage opportunities that are quite beneficial, as we might understand. And also in terms of risk management, their objective is the same thing, is to strengthen resilience and reducing the losses because of disasters. So in other words, they share the same perspectives. That's the convergence, and that's exactly where we have to use synergies at its best. We are in urgent times. We're living urgent times, so we have to try to respond to those challenges that we have in terms of disasters and risk reduction. We have limited resources, so we cannot duplicate or replicate our resources because they are limited. If we now talk about food safety, this report states that there are some options that are quite effective for management and adaptation, and specifically on food safety. You know this already, but let me just share with you. Most of the ones that are looking at this are watching the seminar or listening to it, but these two reports are being read by people that might not be related to our industry or to food safety, specifically, so that they might not understand it fully. That is why this message has to be quite clear. It's talking about improving crops, agroforestry, diversification of lots and landscaping, adaptation based on community, strengthening of biodiversity. And of course, there are some other things, such as technified risks, improvements in technical aspects, of course. This is the last message I would like to convey. And I would say it's a concept or a different approach. There is the whole chapter in our report, the sixth assessment report, that talks about the resilient development vis-a-vis climate. What does that mean? It means that where we have reduced climate risk, there will be adaptation. Where there are lower greenhouse emissions, we will have mitigation. And when we have some other things, such as the improvement of biodiversity or the achievement on the sustainable development objectives as well. This is the way in which this is the way it looks. Unfortunately, I cannot use my mouse, right? Someone else managing it. But if you can clearly see the upper trend, the green line, that one to our right, exactly. You can clearly see there that in order to reach that level, we also need to look at the way in which resilient ecosystem looks like. We have many things entailed, such as sustainable development actions, transformation mitigations, adaptations, and low risks, of course, which is what we need right now. But the circle that is reddish is the opposite. What would happen if we do not support resilient changes? Will have vulnerability, high poverty, etc. And how we would reach to that the unfortunate scenario? Well, as a matter of fact, we are not going to reach it because it's today, and it says 2030. The reason is that we'll have the first stage of the 2030, which is part of our Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and if we make decisions that are related towards sustainable development, then we will at the same time attain those goals. But if we make decisions where might be unconcerned about the greenhouse effect gases or others, then we will have some issues that are non-resilient towards climate, and that at the same time, or on top of that, we are going to drag with those decisions other sustainable development actions. There's also something very interesting. Between 2022 and 2030, and it's a very powerful message, they say that the options, the window of opportunities, as we have called them, is being closed quite fast. It means that options that we have today, 2 degrees, are not going to be available when we reach to 2025 or when we reach to 2 degrees. That is why it is very important to understand that we have to act upon those decisions today, because we have, well, I don't know, 100 opportunities. But as time goes by and as temperature increases, then we lose this window of opportunities and we'll have less chances. In other words, urgency is one of the most powerful messages that this report wants to convey. Resilient development towards climate, which is one of the challenges I just presented to you, is one that is present right now. In other words, we are facing that in global warming. And the alternatives would be even more limited if this global warming increases over 1.5 degrees, which is certainly possible if, in general, climate change is in more than 2 degrees. The last message that I would like to share with you is the message related to transformation. Einstein said many years ago that if we try to solve current issues, but thinking or doing the same things that we have always done, then we won't be able to reach our goals. So the invitation is towards transformation. What's that? it is just the wide variety of changes that include our technological, social, and other spheres. In other words, it means that sometimes adaptation measures, which are incremental, marginal changes, might be enough. Yes, sometimes. But if we start to resize the uncertainty, we start to see the threats changing, if we see that the natural disaster's origin, that adaptation is not enough. And now, excuse me, adaptation is not enough by itself, but we have to go to transformational adaptation that sometimes are negligible, but still they are very detailed. We have to be very specific about them. And at the same time, the transformation are changes that are deep, innovative in terms of the economical level and social level. And to be able to do transformation, we need to face some changes in our mindsets, in the way we make decisions, in the power distribution, in governance systems, etc., and also in the way in which energy is produced and management of natural resources.
So an important message I would like to convey is that we cannot continue to do things the way we have done them so far. We have not been able to manage the risks appropriately. So we have to see how we're doing the management and how we are embarking upon adaptation, and we should be responsible enough in order to evaluate, assess when we need the transformation, and to put it into practice. Sorry for going so fast, but we had many inconveniences, and I had to catch up. Thank you. Thank you, Paulina, for that presentation, and we'll come back to this topic. We will be discussing about these ideas of transformation that has been depicted here. And thank you very much for giving this overview and remind us the scenario, because sometimes we speak of the risk and we forget that the risk is related to the emissions and these scenarios of emissions, temperature, and so on. And it's very important to have it in mind in order to determine the what we are doing, what is enough, and to open ourselves vis-a-vis the changes that should be introduced. I would like to give the floor now to Mario from Dominica, and he is going to share with us another very concrete experience, showing very well many of these dilemmas from this integrated approach to climate change, the adaptation and the integration of risks, because it's happening in a very complex situation context as the small island states in the Caribbean. And this presentation comes from Dominica. You have the floor now. And we have already your presentation on the screen. Your microphone is muted now. Bueno, buenas tardes a todo el mundo. Hay un sonido de fondo desde el orador. Hay sonido de fondo en... Voy a compartir ahora mi pantalla. Para la persona que no sabe, Dominica está situada en la parte oriente del Caribe y, perdón, la condición para la interpretación no es la óptima porque hay sonido de fondo en el lugar en que está el orador. Obviamente, esto es un gran impulsor para la economía. Sin embargo, en las últimas décadas nosotros hemos tenido este... Sí, tengo la impresión que además no están pasando las slides, no están avanzando. Y no la... We can't see the slides. We are still on the front.
See
well, I'll have to stop share. So I'm going to stop share my screen. I'm going to stop to share again.
En,
a dejar ahí de compartir entonces la pantalla. Lo otro, hay mucho ruido de fondo para hacer la interpretación. No, el ruido de fondo sigue igual, con la misma intensidad. Hay algo, una radio, algo que suena. Como decía anteriormente, ha sido azotado por muchos desastres, ya sea relacionados al clima o no. Y además nosotros vemos que ha habido la introducción de pestes y plagas y también de especies que no son endémicas. Y nosotros tenemos una agenda de resiliencia para poder abocarnos a todas estas materias. ¿Cuáles son los retos ahora para Dominica? Obviamente nosotros estamos viviendo en desastres, somos muy particularmente vulnerables a los desastres, debo decir, como parte y una gran parte de la población vive además expuesta a estas amenazas con condiciones socioeconómicas que son muy decadentes y que además han desarrollado, han destruido mucho y además nuevamente podemos decir que hay retos en la materia ambiental que afectan el deterioro de la tierra, de los suelos, que es una amenaza muy grande, ya que la mayor parte de la agricultura se practica en la ladera de los cerros. Durante 27 años, desde 1980 a 2007, 24.000 personas fueron afectadas por los desastres naturales en Dominica. Y además nosotros tuvimos una eh, tormenta tropical que se llama Erika en el año 2015, que tuvo como resultado pérdidas de 483 millones de dólares, lo que ha sido muy significativo y además ha afectado a nuestro país en gran medida. De forma similar, en el año 2017 tuvimos uno de los huracanes más importantes, María, que provocó además pérdidas en la agricultura, en el sector también del ganado, de la ganadería, y este es uno de los retos que hemos enfrentado. Claro, nosotros hemos sido afectados significativamente, además, por todas estas temporadas de huracanes en en el Atlántico, y además hemos ido aplicando todos los principios de gestión de riesgos de desastre que están a nuestra mano. Aquí tenemos una iniciativa que incluye, por ejemplo, la asociatividad para estos proyectos de gestión de las tierras y que busca mejorar los incidentes de degradación de las tierras en Dominica. También estamos tomando en cuenta la vulnerabilidad y mejorar esta situación, y además específicamente tenemos que ver lo que sucede en cuanto a la erosión de los terrenos. Como pueden ver aquí, antes esto estaba cubierto con vegetación y vemos
Natural actions there, land degradation is of significance to us. And as such, our actions to mitigate that relies on a number of approaches addressing sustainable and alternative sloping hillside technologies. We also see that we have had under this sustainable land management initiative the development of parish land maps. And in this case, there we look at flash floods and slide susceptibility maps. In the parish of St. Joseph, which is one of our largest watershed catchment areas there, we do see the vulnerability and the susceptibility to those. Incidentally, somewhere in 1997, this community was heavily hit by anthropogenic-induced disaster, where we had the Matria Dam collapsing and actually affecting the low-lying community of St. Joseph. So yeah, the degradation of watersheds is something of concern to us, and this sustainable land management project addresses a number of the drivers of land degradation, i.e. Soil erosion, anthropogenic sources of bad agricultural practices. And as such, we attempt to actually develop much more sustainable practices by capacitating our farming community through extension trainings. We also had the participatory integrated climate smart agriculture project sponsored and facilitated by the University of the Reading, in partnership with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. And what we actually developed in this project there was capacity and participatory enhancement. So we exposed a number of our farmers and the farming community to the systems of early warning, to the systems of integrated smart climate agriculture decision-making processes. So for example, a number of the farmers were exposed to how to utilize climatic data in terms of making informed decisions. How does the weather patterns inform in terms of your agronomic and cultural practices on farms? So we expose them in terms of the cultural practices and the decisions they need to do in the wet season as opposed to the dry season. And that in itself was very significant, where we trained over 30 extension officers in participatory climate smart agricultural tools, as well as officers from the lands and service departments in terms of geotechnical monitoring devices, the installation of weather systems, just to name a few. So again, all this is done with an attempt to improve our early warning systems as it relates to flash floods, rainfall patterns, and basically in capacitating the farming community in terms of making much more informed decisions. So we had some 336 farmers participating and being exposed to this PICSA module. Like I said, developed in partnership with the University of the Reading and the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. Now, we also have the public sector investment program, which is actually facilitated by the government of Dominica. And at my office in the Division of Agriculture, we run a disaster risk management project, which we focus heavily on sustainable hillside farming technologies, the SALT approach, where we actually expose the farming community to a number of these techniques: contour farming, terracing, check dams, construction, and more significantly, the use of vetiver. And this graphic there is actually demonstrating one of our sites where we are actively pursuing this kind of technologies. So the use of vetiver grass is significant in terms of curbing erosion on our hillsides, because unfortunately for us, over 60% of farming in Dominica is actually done on hillsides which have slopes in excess of 20 to 30 degrees. So that means to say that erosion is a very real threat, and as such, there the mitigating efforts needed to curb that is real. In nowhere in our lifetime history we will see flat available land as it is customary in these Latin American countries in terms of agriculture expansion. For us, a typical farm consists of anywhere between 2 hectares on a slope. And as such, tree crop production in association with low impact agriculture is actually the hallmark in terms of resilience. So this public sector investment program is through the government of Dominica, is investing heavily in demonstration sites, highlighting and depicting to the farming communities the options associated with actually utilizing our sloping hills in a much more efficient and sustainable manner. Because like I said, unfortunately for us, this is where most of our farming activities will take place. And as such, we see the reintroduction of the vetiver reed as a significant mitigation component in terms of the resilience of our farming systems. Here we see our extension officers are being trained in the use of the A-frame, particularly as it relates to the counter farming elements associated with hillside farming technologies. And that in itself is one of the hallmarks of the Dominican farming module. In our past, we have had a number of Eastern Caribbean English-speaking countries come down to understand the technologies associated with hillside farming agriculture, because nowhere in the Eastern Caribbean island will you see an abundance of hillside farming technologies as in Dominica. So for us, definitely disaster risk management, climate change adaptation within the agricultural sector is significant based on past experiences, based on the challenges that we have with our rainfall patterns. So for example, in the central part of the island, we experience over 10,000 millimeters of rainfall per annum, making Dominica one of the most significant high rainfall areas of the world. And that in itself is challenging with regards to curbing the erosive potential of the inundations of the water. So again, some of the outputs associated with these public sector investment programs are improved agronomic practices to include organic fertilization, minimal soil disturbance, and the incorporation of residues. And again, the whole issue of terracing, and using a number of soft appropriate technologies which would actually make land conservation and agroforestry a win-win situation for us in Dominica. So I believe that I've come to an end of my presentation, and we leave with the words by saying that the non-visible direct monetary benefits in terms of us doing that is reflected by this picture down here, where that Dominica has prided itself in having an abundance of natural forest cover. We are actually one of the few English-speaking Caribbean islands which have a natural UNESCO World Heritage Site. A number of other English-speaking islands have cultural sites, but the UNESCO...
Lo que significa entonces un cambio, pero en el Parque de UNESCO, por ejemplo, está destacado por, en esta parte, por la instalación que se...
Again highlights the abundance of the flora diversity of Dominica, and as such, the efforts towards its preservation. And as such, hillside farming technologies for us in Dominica is on the rise, having gone through cycles of ups and downs. The reintroduction of vetiver as an effective grass barrier in curbing the erosive potential of our hillside farms is significant. And as such, we go forward in moving these agricultural developmental strategies in terms of making our systems much more resilient, much more productive, and at the end of the day, increasing the livelihoods of our farming communities. And with these words, I would like to say thank you very much, Marianne.
Thank you to you, Almario. Muchas gracias a nuestro panelista.
Thank you very much to you, Mario, and our panel members. It's very interesting to see how from the Department of Environment of Dominica, with the state funds, by the way, and a very interesting vision for risk management, where the soil, land, management is the key point, and that's why we have all these components that are more adaptive in the risk scenarios in those small state country in the Caribbean islands, which has this context that certainly sets them in a very difficult situation, but they are starting to managing it. Okay, we are now going to the third and last block of our seminar, this web seminar, that is questions and answers. We have more than 660 participants connected, so I would like now to maybe leave your questions in our chat, the YouTube channel, where I'm sure you are looking at these presentations, and the ones who are not looking at it from the FAO webpage. And that means that we are going to start with a question for Jessica that is related to an area where she might have lots of experience. That means that in the multilateral agreements, and also specific instruments that is related on the framework for climate change, that is the contributions, the national contributions. For the ones that might not be aware of those, these are the contributions that countries voluntarily commit to or abide to and adaptation measurements. And I would like to know, we would like to know from Jessica's experience, how decentralized are these in these NDCs, in this RECLIMA? How much of that has already maybe permeated on the NDC of El Salvador? And if we are integrating this into our instruments of different policies, what's the opportunity, in other words, and how we could leverage that, that cross-sectional approach? Thank you very much, Marian. You know what, that NDCs, well, our country has presented one in January 2022. El Salvador also presented the update of NDCs on the UN framework and for climate change, of course. And this has entailed the 7 priority sectors in El Salvador. Each one of them presented their own adaptation and mitigation impact measures, and we can find some areas on risk management, how we can incorporate on certain actions. And some areas it's been through resources, such as the ones that the institutions, organizations, or entities have worked on that to face the risk. For example, we have the Ministry or our Treasury Department that has a specific policy for disasters management. And part of those priorities and financial priorities, to be more specific, they allocate funds to face these emergencies. We also have governance ministry that looks at all the land or the territory protection, civil protection for prevention and mitigation in times of disaster. So as an entity, they are, of course, preparing themselves when for the times that we'll have to face these issues. But we have some also standards that are being considered to face such challenges. For example, Ministry of Housing or Public Works, they are also proposing among different changes or the measures that they are undertaking as countries to work on the construction vulnerability areas and at the same time in precarious urban settlements. That's one of the projections on NDCs, but also in the occupational health and others in work centers in case of increase of temperatures. That's also part of risk prevention, and we also have, as has already been mentioned in biodiversity, the sustainable management of forests and landscaping. This is specifically on the dry corridor. We have the restored areas unit by 2030, working towards that objective to face the climate risk issues and sustainable management for water resources that has, as a matter of fact, been considered a country priority. So, as I'm saying, each one of those sectors have proposed their own measures to try to adaptate to climate change, but at the same time, they are reducing those risks or mitigating them. Thank you, Jessica, for your answer. And undoubtedly, it's a very important perspective from the agricultural point of view. Of course, we're talking about climate change because we are talking about the community of practices that have that in common. So we need to look at that convergence, but it's not by chance, because in agriculture, climate risks are the main risks that they are facing or we are facing. That's why it's important to know how these instruments are being brought forward into concrete actions in the food industry, in the food area. And on that same token, I would like now to ask a question to Paulina Aldunce, going back to one point that she mentioned during her presentation by the end that is related to these deep changes. And I would like, Paulina, for you to help us understand how, if risk management and adaptation towards climate change might entail these transformation efforts into the agro-food system, and how these elements would look like. Thank you. Perfect. Now, transformation. Let me look for an example that is representing both adaptation, risk management, and agriculture. In Nepal, as an example, farmers, because of frequent droughts, they have had to leave aside part of their agriculture, or sometimes try to look for or use small areas. So one of the transformation is that the government has helped them or aided them to look for other types of subsistence means. In this case, in Nepal, it's been tourism. So besides working on agriculture, but not as their only means for survival. So they add these other means, which is, or channel, which is tourism. So changing that for one person is considered transformation because it's a deep type of change, right? Especially if we are talking about natural resources, because they have a specific report that is much closer to such as the ones we might have because we live in the cities. So changing their livelihood to one that is different is a type of transformation. But in this case, this is a transformation for positive interaction. The reason behind that is that if this program hadn't been undertaken or those people hadn't been helped, men, at least men, or both men and women, but men specifically, would have to migrate, forcibly migrate, of course. And this means that they are permanent migrations. And migrations is a different kind of transformation, but it's a negative trace. So there are many other things that are being composed here. Being proactive, looking at impact today, but being concerned about future impact is also very important. Another example that I might use is one that was undertaken in China. I really enjoy this understanding because it brings us not to fall into quote unquote bad transformation. I am just tailoring that to my needs today. But this means that it's because of droughts, they have changed their rice crops to cotton. In general, crop change is not a transformation in itself, in the system, in the agroecological system, because they are very similar. If we just change from one fruit to another, but if we change from rice to cotton, it is a deep change because it's an agricultural system that is completely different. So they have been able to diversify their economy, they have been able to fight economic vulnerability, and so far so good. But we have also seen the increase of child labor. So that is a specific example when we have a path that needs to be changed because it has more negative impact than positive. So it is considered a positive transformation perspective. That's why it's important that from that perspective to plan adaptation, transformation, or risk management differently, to look at or ponder every adverse secondary effects that this might entail. It is very important, and all these changes should also bring hand-in-hand equity. It might sound really romantic, like risk management has to be equitable, but IPCC, one of the key messages that they are bringing to us is that it has to be equitable. If we want to adapt ourselves to climate change, we need to adapt to the ones that are most vulnerable, because of course, it's not going to be very useful for anyone if we do this adaptation that is on an equal terms. We need to help those that need it the most. So to try to be equitable in that perspective is really important. Thank you, Paulina. Very specific examples that I'm sure are going to help us to open our minds to all different sorts of possibilities. So maybe considering that last point that you mentioned, well, this is a twofold question because there are adverse effects that some ideas might have, and also the importance of monitoring, which are the consequences or the impact of those things that we are thinking at a policy formulation level. But then I would like to ask a question to Mario, our panel member from Dominica, related to the approach, inclusive approach, and related to this agenda of not leaving anyone behind. It's something that we have not talked much about today, but I would like to ask Almario if this is within your radar, in the radar of the program that you're leading from the Ministry of Agriculture, of course, if it is something that might be leveraged, or which might be the challenges that you are considering from your perspective, from your role, leading role. Thank you.
Dominica, the whole issue of resilience within the ag sector really and truly took a root after the passage of Hurricane Maria in 2017. At that time, the Honorable Prime Minister actually addressed the United Nations, and they declared that Dominica would become the first climate resilient country of the world. And as such, that in itself had a lot of political implications. One of the implications that came to fruition was the creation of the Climate Resilient Executing Agency of Dominica, CREED. That organ was actually constituted with the objective of actually promulgating the resilience agenda throughout all the productive sectors, with agriculture being prime focus. For us, in the ag sector there, we see that, for example, the whole issue of gender is of significance, whereas addressing the whole issue of resilience and sustainability. So work carried out by the United Nations Development Program on a small what I would call communal farming project actually revealed that women farmers and a significant percentage of women farmers were actually utilizing much more climate resilient technologies as opposed to their male counterparts. And we also found, for example, in certain geographic areas of the country, the ideology and the acceptance of resilient principled agricultures was much more widespread as opposed to other areas. So for example, in areas of Dominica where we saw the influx of a number of expatriates and non-nationals, we saw that ideology being very much more heightened. The whole issue of organic agriculture, the whole issue of low impact agriculture there, we saw the percentages being much more elevated as opposed to other areas where these people did not actually have a significant percentage. And again, the issue of gender equity within the ag sector. That survey there, although not officially released, we have seen the preliminary results, and what it actually highlights is the understanding by a significant percentage of our women farmers of the importance of building resilience within the ag sector. Incidentally, for example, in one of our biggest vegetable producing zones, the Monproste area of the southern region of the island, more than 80% of vegetable production is undertaken by women. That is significant in terms of our major producing vegetable areas, 80% being produced by women. And that sector of the ag society showing a significant appreciation of the principles of climate resilience, disaster risk management, organic agriculture. And it has been exemplified in terms of the avoidance, for example, of harsh agrochemicals, the avoidance of these conventional approaches to agriculture. And that in itself is being instrumental in terms of how now the Ministry of Agriculture now orientates and reorientates its works program. Like I said, the Honorable Prime Minister made this announcement in 2017 to become the first world climate resilient country. And as such, our efforts in agriculture are exactly at that. How do we build resilience within the sector in terms of our farming systems, in terms of the legislative backups and policies that we associate with that. So as we speak, we have just finalized our agricultural policy with assistance from the Food and Agriculture Organization.
El plan de acciones para la resiliencia climática y el plan de recuperación. Por ejemplo, uno de los principios va a ser la implementación de un 60% de las áreas productivas en base al sistema orgánico. Y nosotros vamos a estar listos entonces para abordar esto en forma muy holística a nivel nacional y incluir entonces esta agricultura orgánica dentro de la gestión de riesgo de desastre. Entonces, además tenemos la inclusividad de género, que es muy importante, y un número de las familias estratégicas orgánica y todos
programs
los
oriented to the farming community. Thank you.
programas de capacitaciones. Pero
Yes, Almario,
a su pregunta. Muchas gracias, Almario.
Por esta perspectiva de las oportunidades, de los desafíos y de las cosas que se están pensando en Dominica para trabajar con enfoques más inclusivos. Creo que el género es un elemento ciertamente que ya no se discute.
Equality is something that is not discussed anymore. It's very important, and it's also significant to understand that we are dealing with the risk management and the food systems and so on. We're speaking about people who are experiencing particular situations. Therefore, we have to understand these issues and how they are related. And concerning the threats and vulnerabilities these people have when we are devising our strategies for risk management, we should have this transforming view that is going to be used in order to tackle these issues, and they will not be solved with the traditional measures that therefore we need to change the mindset, and we should not forget that. I would like to ask a question now that comes from the audience. This is a public that I will address to Jessica Laguardia from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment in El Salvador. This is the role of the political willingness in order to come up with policies helping the sustainable development. And maybe I would like to add something else to this question, something related to the willingness and the mechanisms and the obstacles in order to establish the coordination mechanisms in order to work jointly and to allow the synergies that Paulina said are very important because we have restricted resources and we have major problems to approach, and we should avoid to
Bueno,
duplicate
gracias,
the
María.
effort. Thank
Bueno,
you,
definitivamente
Marian.
el componente
And
político es
definitely
como
the
muy
political
importante en
component
la
is
gestión,
very important
¿verdad? Y sí
for
juega un rol
managing,
relevante,
and it
¿verdad? No
plays
lo
a
podemos
relevant
olvidar,
role.
especialmente
And
las
we
instituciones de
cannot forget
gobierno,
that,
¿verdad? Que dirigen
particularly amongst
las
the
políticas.
political or
Sabemos
government
que hay una
institutions
agenda
that are
política que también debe
driving the whole
sensibilizar y
process, and they
concientizar
should be
a las
aware,
necesidades de los
sensitized
riesgos,
vis-a-vis
del cambio
the needs
climático, ¿verdad?
for
Sabemos
the
también que tiene que ver
climate
con un tema de
change
sensibilización y
management, and we
educación,
know that this is
¿verdad?
related to
Como
education
funcionarios
and
públicos, sí, para
awareness
nosotros también es como un
campaigns.
rol importante.
And therefore, it
Sabemos
is a
que cada
very
vez que
important
hay un
role.
cambio de gobierno,
We know
nosotros
that
necesitamos
every time when
sensibilizar,
there is
¿verdad?
a change of administration,
A
we
los
need
nuevos actores
to
políticos que llegan.
sensitize the new
Por eso es
political
importante
players that are coming on.
trasladar y transmitir y
And that's why
comunicar
we need to
estas
convey
prioridades,
these
¿verdad? Las
messages,
necesidades que tiene
these
la población, las necesidades
priorities,
que
the
están en el
needs that the
territorio,
population
las
have, the needs
vulnerabilidades
that
que
are out there
presentan,
in the
¿verdad?
communities, and
Tanto
the
a nivel de cambio
vulnerabilities
climático
that are
como cuestión de
involved in
riesgo,
terms of the
¿verdad? Porque poco a
climate
poco tenemos
change
que
and the risk
continuar
management.
y
And
seguir con estos
therefore,
esfuerzos
gradually we should
y
continue
darle
to deploy these
sostenibilidad,
efforts and
¿verdad?
to provide
A esas
sustainability to
prioridades y
those
que
policies and
traduzcan en
priorities
estrategias
that will be
y en planes
translated
nacionales,
into
¿verdad?
strategies
Es
and
un proceso
nationwide
a veces
plans
lento,
throughout a
¿verdad? Pero que
process
sí es
that
muy
sometimes
importante, porque
is
contar
slow,
con el
but
respaldo
very
político
important. We
también
need to
te
have the
facilita
political
movilizar
support, and
fondos, te
this
facilita
facilitates
presentar
the
proyectos que
funding
puedan incorporar
mobilization
todos estos
and
elementos,
also
¿verdad?
including
Y
all the corresponding
claro que todas
elements.
estas políticas y todas
Of
estas
course,
prioridades
all of these
luego también
policies
deben ser
and
consensuadas,
priorities should
consultadas a través de diferentes
be
partes
agreed
participantes.
upon and come out of a
Y claro, esto,
consultation
bueno, tú
process.
mencionabas también el tema de
As you said
dificultades, ¿verdad? Muchas
before, we
veces
have some
se establece la
difficulties.
agenda, se establecen las
Sometimes
prioridades
we set up
políticas, pero
the
también es necesario
agenda,
los
the
recursos,
priorities, but
¿verdad? Y
we
es
need to
aquí
count
también
on
donde
the
tiene que
resources.
haber un
And this
accionar
is where we need to have
coordinado,
a
articulado con otras
coordinated action
instituciones, ¿verdad?
linked to other institutions.
Lo mismo que tú mencionabas con la
As you said
GNS
before,
es también articular
with
esfuerzos
the
de todos los
NDCs
sectores,
should
¿verdad? Porque
be
al final es
including
la
the efforts from
transformación
all
de
the
estos sectores
sectors
en
because it's the
agricultura, en
transformation of these
energía, en
sectors related
economía,
to
en obras públicas, en
agriculture,
salud, cómo
energy,
todos ellos se van
economy, public
transformando,
works, and see
¿verdad? Cómo todos ellos
how
van
they
asimilando
will
todos estos
be
cambios en el clima, en el
assimilating
riesgo,
all
y
these
cómo se van
changes in
adaptando, ¿verdad?
climate and the
Entonces,
risks and
por eso
how they
también,
will be
si hay un respaldo
adapting to them.
político que
And if
empuje,
there is
¿verdad?
political
Todas estas
support that is
acciones
pushing all of
se
these
facilita
actions,
mucho más, ¿verdad?
will
Entonces, sí, el rol
facilitate this
es
further.
importantísimo.
So this role is very
Muchas
important.
gracias, Jessica,
Thank you, Jessica,
tu respuesta.
for your answer.
Has mencionado, ¿no?, el tema de la
You
participación y
mentioned
quiero tomar este
participation, and I
impulso
would like to
para
take
abordar un
now
par de preguntas que están
this
apareciendo en
element
el
to
chat
approach
que
some
tienen que ver
questions
y que
that
le
are
voy a
coming
dirigir
in the chat
a Paulina
box.
porque
And I will address
creo
this
que
question
su
to
trabajo y su
Paulina because I
formación
think that
tal
this is
vez
a
le ha
transformation
permitido acceder a lo que
that
nos están
allowed
preguntando acá. Nos
to
preguntan
have access
si hay
to
datos
people are expressing
mundiales o a
here.
nivel
People are
latinoamericano
asking if
respecto
we
del nivel
have
de
Asian or
conciencia
Latin
del
American
cambio
data
climático y de su
related to the
impacto a nivel
awareness
estatal,
and
poblacional,
the
sobre
impact it
todo en la
has
población
in the
rural, nos
population
preguntan,
at the state sector
y
and
que
in the
también
rural
tal vez se
communities.
vincula
And
a
maybe
una
this is
pregunta
also
que es
linked
cómo se
to
puede
another
generar esta
important question,
conciencia a nivel de
how
la
we can
sociedad.
come up with this awareness
Y
at
acá
the
se
level of
comenta
the
que muchas
society,
decisiones hoy en día
and
se
the
toman por factor
comments are
económico. ¿Qué
received
podemos
here that
nosotros
sometimes this is
conocer de tu
just out of
experiencia, Paulina, respecto de
the
estos
economic
temas?
results. So what is your opinion on these topics,
Voy a empezar
Paulina?
por la segunda
I will
pregunta.
start by
¿Me
the
escuchan bien?
second question.
Ya,
Can
la
you hear
verdad
me
es
well?
que para lograr
To tell you the
que la
truth,
población
to
independiente de cuáles actores sociales sean, tomen conciencia de los efectos del cambio climático, hay dos factores que son fundamentales. Uno de ellos es el traspaso de la información, que haya información disponible para la gente. Pero eso no es suficiente. Esa información tiene que estar en un formato que las personas puedan entender. No sacamos nada por liberar mapas preciosos, pero complejo, desde las universidades, si es que esa información no puede ser traducida a las personas, si es que esa información está en un lenguaje que no es accesible. Y por otro lado, es muy importante que la gente que tome conciencia de esta problemática, cómo lo va a afectar en este caso específico a través de los desastres de origen natural en la agricultura y los medios rurales, es algo que ha sido muy efectivo, es decir, o hacerles ver cómo específicamente en su región, en su área y en su actividad impacta el cambio climático. Es decir, una persona va a estar mucho más, va a tomar mucho más conciencia si sabe que en la agricultura del maíz los impactos del cambio climático son A, B, C, D, y que además sabe que en la región que está o en el área que está va a haber una disminución del flujo hídrico, va a haber un aumento de las temperaturas y cómo eso va a impactar su cultivo. Yo creo que esos son dos factores importantes para que la gente tome conciencia con respecto al cambio climático. La pregunta número uno, con respecto a los números de cuál es la conciencia, no tengo idea. A ser sincera, no tengo ese dato. Esos son datos que salieron precisamente o más bien desde los estudios de percepción al cambio climático, y la verdad es que no sé si habrá, yo me atrevería a decir que no hay datos agregados a ese nivel. Puede que hayan estudios a distintos niveles. Entonces nosotros sí hemos hecho estudios de percepción, por ejemplo, del cambio climático en distintas investigaciones, pero en el Valle de Aconcagua o en Chañaral o en algunas localidades específicas, pero tener un número agregado así mundial, yo creo que me faltaría.
Muchas gracias, Paulina. Era difícil la pregunta número uno. Creo que la respuesta que nos has dado a la pregunta número dos también nos ilumina mucho, ¿no? Estamos hablando de cosas muy concretas en las que tenemos que trabajar muchísimo para poder generar conciencia y ojalá el día que así se mida, los números sean muy positivos y nos permitan avanzar en este cambio y transformación que necesitamos implementar. Quisiera avanzar una siguiente pregunta que no sé, tal vez alcanzaré, no sé si vamos a alcanzar a hacer alguna más para el Mario. Es otra pregunta que aparece de nuestros participantes a través del chat y que yo también le voy a agregar un elemento de mi parte. La pregunta es sobre innovaciones significativas que debemos implementar en las prácticas de gestión del riesgo de desastres a nivel comunitario. Y yo quisiera agregarle una segunda dimensión que es sobre el rol de los servicios de prevención. Al Mario, yo sé que tú eres un especialista en servicios de extensión y quería saber cómo ves tú el rol de los servicios de extensión en esta transformación, en esta convergencia y qué habría que hacer para potenciarlo.
Thanks again, Mariam. That's a very nice question. Actually, we have been looking and taking a critical review of our extension services in Dominica since the passage of Hurricane Maria in September of 2017. We have realized and recognized that our extension services and the service offered to the farming community has to go much more beyond that of the agricultural need. So the concept of community emergency and rescue teams have actually surfaced, whereby we have capacitated the local community in terms of search and rescue operations. So in each and every single community of Dominica, following the passage of Hurricane Maria, through the Office of Disaster Risk Management, we have actually trained local community people, both men and women, in the area of search and rescue, because that was significant for us post-Hurricane Maria, where we lost over 50 people, you know. So that we have actually tied that into our extension services and now offer what we call rural advisory extension services, to include that of agriculture, to include social services, not necessarily related to ag, but to the whole rural population. So as a result now, we have a number of ministries offering these advisory services. The Ministry of Agriculture is just one entity. So we have the Ministry of Community Development, we have the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs, even offering social support with regards to faith groups and organizations, you know, and the whole importance of having the community really and truly gel together post-disaster. Because really and truly, the experiences of 2017 Hurricane Maria is a living testimony of the effects of climate change. So for every Dominican, that reality was manifestation of, yes, climate change is real, because category 5 hurricane for over 12 hours pounding on your doorstep there. Believe me or not, there, it was living testimony that climate change is real. As recent as this weekend there, we saw some torrential rains in Dominica actually inflicting significant damage on the natural landscapes, especially in areas where a number of infrastructural projects are actually taking place concurrently. And that in itself is living testimony of the effects of climate change. Much more frequent rainstorms, much more intense rainstorms, and definitely the dry season is shortening. So for example, it was very, very frequent for us in Dominica to distinguish between a dry period and a wet period. Right now, so for example, last month, the month of April, March, April, which are typically dry months in Dominica, was exceedingly wet. Even probably be above normal conditions. So these examples here definitely make climate change a living example within the psyche of the Dominican population, because Paulina actually said something very, very interesting there. The collective consciousness required to actually change that. And that in itself, I believe, has to be done through a number of innovative programs. So for example, myself, I am a musician, so I try to echo a lot of the messages in my music. I have actually produced a song called Temperature is Rising, where I have actually highlighted the effects of climate change in terms of music and song. And I believe all these non-traditional areas are welcome. So for example, for the office of the UNDP, we did a wonderful piece in Dominica where we actually did a community theatrical in terms of highlighting exactly what we are talking about, you know, climate change, the challenges associated with agriculture, and how farmers and rural communities can utilize natural resources to the benefit. So I think that we definitely need to go outside of the box in terms of conveying the message, the medium, and how it is presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Almario, and apologies for the audience. Perdón que hubo un momento que se perdió la traducción. Esperamos.
Sorry for the translation was lost for a couple of minutes, but unfortunately you were able to get Mario's answer. I would like to mention something. We are on top of the time right now, but it is a question that I have at a personal level, and maybe you might share it as well. We have been talking about a convergence between risk management and adaptation to climate change, and hopefully everything is clear. The convergence point between these two agendas specifically apply to the agricultural segments and food afters, specifically on this scenario that was just reminded to us by Almario. And that means that in every presentation, we have been reminded of that same thing. And it's also related to policies such as plans and programs, but specifically on the strategy and policies or standards. So in a context such as this one and applied to this segment, I would like to know if do we need different instruments for the management, the risk management? Why or why not? And I would like now to open the floor to our panels, and if you volunteer on this answer, so that you can share your opinion, please, on this answer. Any volunteer? Okay, Paulina, go ahead. Paulina, and I think Jessica also wants to answer that. So go ahead. By all means, as I was saying, from the transformation perspective, public policies or standards have not been enough. We will never have zero vulnerability, of course. But there is, of course, a lot of space for room for improvement, excuse me. So by all means, that means that your questions were on how could you please work on that aspect. I would say that one of the most important aspects from the IPCC message is urgency. So that means that we have to consider urgency. In other words, just to give you an example, if in 4 years we do not decrease greenhouse effects, that means that we are going to achieve in less than 2 decades, we're going to reach 2.5. So imagine how urgent it is in terms of adaptation. It is huge. So definitely we need to work on our public policies and the uncertainty and also urgency. Those are the two things that we need to work with. And I would also only like to compliment something about art and music. We have seen how effective it is to work with art in the communities to overcome trauma after a disaster, or maybe to promote creativeness or creativity in our population. We have undertaken different projects where we have explored artistic techniques, and we have been able to work on very deep results compared to what we have used before. So I just wanted to compliment that compared or just to what Mario mentioned. Quite interesting. Thank you very much. Let me now yield the floor to Jessica. Would you like to take a shot on that answer, please? The question is, we needed different instruments to face adaptation and risk management. Paulina, we do need specific instruments. We understand that, right? But the other question was, which was, I would say that implicit, is if we need or we would like to use different instruments, or if maybe we can use a common instrument. And that's why I would like Jessica to have your input. I know the question is different now. Okay, anyways, let me take a shot because I understood if the question was if it was just enough to have strategies or policies to fill. Yes, that's fine. But if you could please answer both ways, if they're enough, or if we need different, or if we can work in one single instrument or set of instruments where convergence between risk management and climate change adaptation might be expressed, I would say that would be an excellent way of answering. Okay. The first answer would be, I would say no, just as Paulina, that it's not enough. But I also think that it's quite relevant to have a vision, an objective goal that is certainly needed, because we don't want to be so scattered in our thoughts. We want to be articulated. And as Paulina was saying, we have an objective, we have urgency, and we have to reduce those gases, etc. But that's also incorporated in a policy, because that means that there's an agenda and a roadmap that we are following. But at the same time, this has to be complemented through different mechanisms. It could be participatory, or the different stakeholders brought together. They're quite complex. There's not one single solution or one single plan that might respond to every single question. And then, although it's important to have a common instrument, but at the same time, I think it is necessary to have plans that are concentrated by or per sector, and that at the same time might work on the needs for that area. That doesn't mean that they are not going to complement each other. They should certainly be aligned and complement each other, like the word says, right? As we mentioned in biodiversity, agriculture, and climate change, they are all interlocked. So having adaptation to climate change means that we are going to have some other benefits, such as mitigation, carbon sequestration, soil improvement, etc. So all of that is interrelated, one single world, one single planet. And we don't need to have a common objective, but once again, meeting the specific or differentiated needs for each one of those. Thank you, Jessica, for your answer and for coming into my original question. I'm sorry, but it was a great interest on that. Okay, I think we are reaching to the end of our time. Unfortunately, I know that we went 10 minutes past the time that we had allocated, but thank you very much for your willingness, Almario, Jessica, and Paulina, and also our participants, more than 130 participants. So it's quite evident for all of us, and hopefully for you too, that the convergence between adaptation, climate change, and disasters and risk management disaster is interesting, and also that we need to do it in a systematic way, that there are strategy systems and tools that have brought from the experience of each community that we need to integrate or escalate. And that's why we need to know what the proposals and strengths are in each one of the community of practices, so that those strategies are not replicated, or that we have double efforts, and also when we have specific leaderships, when there are specific experiences, and to work on those also as a large, huge, one single program, but when each one of the community practices is going to perform a specific role. And specifically, we all need to adapt to our resources in these difficult times, and to, at the same time, meet the needs of the agri-food industry, and help them meet their own role for sustainable development. FAO is fully committed on the support of that transition and the reactive preparedness, also trying to work on those emergency reactive response, being more proactive, preventive, and anticipative, and to all those transformation areas, to try to build on the different systems that are resilient and sustainable, working with our partners so as to make those current systems without leaving anyone behind, as we said, and in order to promote or extend those measures for reducing vulnerability and risk and adaptation to climate change at agricultural and landscape levels. That's the message that we wanted to convey today. I hope you all share this message, and also share the urgency and our motivation, or drive, or driving force to keep on working on this. Thank you very much to all our panel members. Thank you to all the attendees to our panels and to our speeches, and you will be able to find the FAO America webpage, all the videos and everything in our broadcasting channels. Okay, so thank you very much. Have